Let's make a start with the doc, if we may. You obviously came to James through the Ghost Stories for Christmas, but you must have read the stories fairly young, I'm imagining.
Yes, I think about 8 or 9. I remember getting them out of the library. Ghost Stories of Antiquary, and there was also a strange book which I'd still like to track down, which I used to go back and get out every month, which was called, I think, an M.R. James Miscellany, and it was just loads of, it was like a scrapbook of things, rather appropriately, of bits and pieces of first edition cover. I was absolutely fascinated by it, but it was the Lawrence Gordon Clark films that first got me into it.
Did the writing, sort of, at that age particularly, did the writing mean anything more to you than the fear? Did you already feel something more than just that sense of fear?
I remember finding them very funny, which is something that is, not always appreciated. He had a very dry sense of humour, and he has a recurring thing with working class characters, usually librarian assistants and things like that. You can imagine, because he wrote them to be read, so you can imagine him thinking, well, I'll do one of my funny Cockney voices for this one. They'll like that. But also, I think, it's difficult to sort of retro-engineer it. I remember feeling that there was a lot of, it felt like there was a great deal of knowledge. I remember thinking that it was true, if you know what I mean, that when he talked about this manuscript, you would just think, oh, that's true then. It's a bit like putting a fake thing at the beginning saying this is based on a true story, and you just fall for it.
Yeah.
Because he had that amazing amount of learning to draw on, But mostly I just remember being very frightened, and in the best possible way. They were kind of, he just nailed what it was, to just so spare. There's this little description, that wonderful thing in Warren the Curious, that his jaw was smashed to bits. It's really nasty, and it's sort of, and I only looked at the face once. That's all he needs to say.
But I thought it was brilliant that you then linked that to the horrendously damaged men he must have seen at that time.
Well, we talked a lot about this, didn't we, John, in formulating the sort of take on it, really, was what sort of a person it had made him, and why such a genial, clubbable man whose speciality was medievalism wrote these rather bizarre stories. I mean, and the theories just go on, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell us some of them, John.
That's good to say. I mean, it's quite interesting that, there's an entire sort of psychosexual reading of his work that people have offered, and we kind of allude to that in the documentary, but equally I think one can push it too far as well, really, because I think as we kind of really established, even from a very kind of young age, he just fundamentally was a horror fan, really. And that just seems to be something that, as maybe a few of us kind of know in the audience, you just kind of get grasped by that at a certain sort of point where you sort of...
If you could explain it, you could then explain it to your mum.
Yes,
which I never could.
Yeah.
And do you think you could ever explain to his mother as well?
Why are you so
Yes,
morbid?
yes.
I don't know.
But I think that was, again, anybody who knew anything about M.R. James or knew what's out there, you have been able to form a very detailed picture of him from not very much material. I mean, there isn't much out there on James, is there? Not on James the man, anyway.
Well, the Michael Cox's biography was a wonderful help.
Shamefully out of print.
Yeah, shamefully out of print, yeah. And he did a huge amount to draw all that stuff together. But it was, I mean, even to the end, we were discussing various theories. There's a story he wrote, the last story he published was called The Vignette, which you alluded to in there, which appears to be a first-hand account of something he saw when he was a child. It's about Great Livermere, the rectory, isn't it? And I'm intrigued by it. I think that he saw something, but the description of the ghost is so odd. It's a hot pink fleshiness. I wonder whether he saw something he wasn't meant to see, and it actually imprinted itself on him. And that plus the imagery which recurs, and it's constant. Torn clothes, long fingernails, dirty shrouds. There's something about it's like he had one formative experience of some kind, which kind of did it for him.
It's fascinating.
As Alan Bennett says, we've all only got a few beans in our tin to rattle.
It's fascinating how James has been rethought and reimagined over the years, and I think it's brilliant that you showed the Jonathan Miller and show some of the 70s stories as well. Do you think that that is going to go on? I mean, obviously you have a tremendous interest in James. Do you think you could go on making ghost stories for Christmas?
I'd like to do
for
one
kids?
every year for the rest of my life. And although I won't embarrass Mark Bell, head of BBC Arts, over there too.
Yes, but he is over there.
That's what I'd like to do. I must also say a huge thank you to the whole cast and crew, but also to do it through BBC Arts was so fantastic. It was like working with the BBC in the 70s, I imagine, in that it was so blissfully free of interference, and it was just everywhere. It was just a light touch. It was lovely. It was a lovely experience over it. Thank you.
How do you translate M.R. James for a 2013 audience? Where do you start with the writing in that instance?
Well, it won't surprise you to learn that I like to be faithful to the writer's vision. And I wanted to, there have been some fantastic adaptations over the years, but I love this story. It's one of my favorites. It's oddly one of his plottiest, it probably is his plottiest story. But I wanted to sort of honor it. But I had an idea. Actually, it was John's idea to set it in the 50s, in that they're often done in the 30s, and the 70s ones certainly. I thought, well, we can sort of take it on a bit, because the 50s have now become a bit more distant. And he always said that the ideal ghost story has a certain haze of distance. It's a story told by someone to someone else, and it's just a little before the war, that sort of thing. So the period thing was very important to me. But most of all, I just wanted to honour the story and make it frightening, which is what I've always loved the best.
Reading the story again after having seen your film, you were extraordinarily faithful. I mean, everything, particularly all the supernatural things that James suggests, down to the black drips onto the will just before the appearance of the ghost, is all there in the chapter. Does that make it harder or easier to visualize?
Well, I didn't. We, as John will attest, John and Sacha will attest, when we got to that part, I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. I just wanted to shoot. We shot a load of things, and then kind of created it in the edit, because I knew I wanted it to be. That ending always had a powerful effect on me. The idea of this kind of this little tap of a black spot, which then spreads into a kind of darkness, a spidery whatever. And so it was sort of impressionistic, which again is something I've always loved about the 70s ones. They're very bold, and their filmmaking, they're very impressionistic, and I wanted to kind of achieve something like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, as you say, I wanted to be faithful, but also to dramatize it, you've got to flesh things out a bit and make dialogue change. And then I had one thing I felt I had to address, which is an odd thing. It's an atypical story in that rather than someone transgressing or digging somewhere where they shouldn't, there's absolutely no reason why Dr. Rand's ghost does this. None. So I completely created Eleanor Bron's character, Mrs. Goundry, so she could eventually say he's twisted, don't trust him, even in death. Because that's what it needed to have. Also, the story has a happy ending, and I couldn't have that.
But I thought that was one of the lovely things you did with it, was that it was both M.R. James and a Gatiss world. And I mean, those characters were fantastic. And
there's a spin-off for Nick Burns, definitely, in Sacha. The George Earl Mysteries. Cynthia, yes. Hello. Hello, chum. That's his catchphrase.
The other thing that I felt that you very much got from the 70s Ghost Stories for Christmas was this idea of, well, it was this particularly the idea of an element of it which was very visual. I mean, in your case, the dust. I thought the way you used the dust, there's so much more going on. Tell us about the dust.
There's a story there.
More dust!
Well, we chose Chetham's Library in Manchester. It's just an amazing place, and I thought I'd never seen it on TV before, only to discover as we were filming that it was the lair of Professor Moriarty in the Jeremy Brett series. It's amazing. It's all meant to happen. Eric Porter stood just where Roy Barraclough did. It won't do, Mr. Who. It's just so beautiful. But really, one of the principal reasons we chose it is because they said we could use atmospheric filler and dust in their priceless collection. And then we turned up and they went, no, you can't do that. I said, but the dust is absolutely crucial. So we came up with an alternative. It's actually it's bulrushes, so it's not filler in that way. It's not going to damage the book. It's all physical, which actually looked rather great in the end. Yeah.
Sacha, you and Mark have obviously had two very high-profile pieces together recently. As a
Stick with me, kid. I'm going to put you in pictures.
Please tell us he's a hard bastard as a director.
He's awful to work with. Absolutely annoying. No, I was really kind of honoured when he asked me after Space and Time. He said, "Oh, Garrett's blonde hair, blue eyes." I was like, right. No, but I always noticed when we were filming Space and Time that Mark was there a lot of the time as well. He was always very kind of specific about what he wanted, and it's not to kind of hinder the actors, it's just making it as truthful as possible, which is always nice, because sometimes it's always so nice to have the writer present, because sometimes you can just go off on a tangent and you're changing lines, amendments are coming through. And what I love about Mark, because I guess he's an actor as well, is that by the time you come to shoot, the script is pretty much where it needs to be. So when Mark asked me to be part of Tractate, and the fact that he was directing it as well was just an honour. And it's always kind of nerve-wracking, because you're like, yeah, it's going to be great. And then you get on set and you go, right, we're shooting our first frame, and we're looking at each other like, here we go. And it was great. Everyone wants to work with him. So everyone who was part of the crew and the team were probably the best people at what they do, and it was just so easy. And as much as you were saying, as Mark's been truthful to M.R. James's story, I never felt that we had to stick to. I felt very liberated, and from the very beginning when we were talking about the project, Mark was very free in terms of letting me put my own take on Garrett as well, which was great.